G'day peeps, my name is Scripps and welcome back to another speed paint. Or should I be more specific and say a Hollow Knight speed paint? And this, if not anything else, it's certainly different because I'm not doing any sort of traditional challenge. I'm not doing a challenge that I've already done before, such as turning a character design into a human or anything of the like. Today we're changing art style completely into something that some of you might consider odd. Because as a bunch of you know, I've been on vacation lately, I've been enjoying myself and I've been playing video games, and then I've been watching some good old YouTube Let's Plays again. And still, one of my favorite personal YouTube Let's Plays is by Jacksepticeye, who played Cuphead. And so I decided to watch that entire playthrough again, and I just fell in love with the style all over again. It's such a cool thing to just rediscover, because it's one of the most unique games when it comes to art style out there, and it certainly deserves to have a challenge done about it, even if it's something as weird as turning bugs into little Cuphead designs. So in order to marry and intertwine these two wonderful art styles that are from completely different worlds, I'm going to take Hornet, the Knight, and Quirrell and turn them into a Depression-era cartoon character. You know, the exact style that Cuphead is aiming for. So let's kick this off with my personal favorite character from Hollow Knight, Hornet, and her vastly changed design once she got into the Roaring 20s. Hornet was very much of a challenge to change because there were so many things about her design that were so very specific and necessary for her character. Because all the designs in Hollow Knight are pretty simplistic and only the most important parts are kept, so it's very hard to change any part individually without either making her character seem off or going too far in a creative direction that I didn't want. I still wanted to stick to the original character design as much as possible, so I could only make so many changes without changing the overall character. So what I decided to do was that I decided to make her a little more cutesy. Oh boy, I know Hornet would hate that. Because we all know that Hornet's design is very confident, and if we were to put her in any sort of stereotype, then she would be the tomboy, can do it all herself kind of princess. But I did have to change up the design a little bit to fit the rubber style animation that was very popular back then. Bones didn't really seem to be a thing that animators cared about. Every single limb was very elongated, and then they were very heavy weighted on the end of their limbs, having big gloves or big feet. Going completely in the different direction from Hornet's design, since she's so sharp and she's very triangular, so I had to soften her up a bit and make her a little more cutesy to sort of compromise between the two art styles. I also decided to change her eyes, but that is a decision that I am not yet 100% confident about. I decided to change her eyes by actually giving her pupils, and the reason that I did this was because I was a little bothered by the fact that it sort of just looked like Hornet was dressed up in 20s clothing and nothing was really changed about the character itself. So I decided to give her these kind of cartoonish pupils, which usually take up the whole eyeball. So that is something that I'm a little worried might have been the solution that I should have gone for instead, where I just turned her entire eye into kind of like the same eyes that I'm gonna give the other characters later on, with just having these big cartoonish pupils with kind of like the indent in them. But alas, instead I decided to stick to her more normal eyes because I thought her kind of sharpish eyes were very, like, I don't know, characteristic of her. Doesn't really matter because I didn't even end up making her characters very sharp. She just ended up looking very roundish in design, which, I mean, she looks very cute. I like that, but I think I derived a little too far off the design, and I definitely think that her actually having pupils might not have helped. I think I should have gone for the more circular, regular cartoon eyes where it's just one big eye and an indent. I feel like that would fit a little bit more of the Hollow Knight art style into this. But I don't know, this could be one of the times where I could ask for you guys' opinions to hear whether or not if you like the design, or whether or not if you could see some different changes or stuff that could have been done to make the design any better. But I guess the final detail that I should be talking about that really sort of changes the design kind of drastically, we could talk about, of course, the shoes, because that looks very different because she normally just has knives for feet. But I already kind of explained that with the rubber hose animation and how, you know, the end of the limb is usually more exaggerated than the limb itself. So I think what I should be talking about is actually her head. I had quite a bit of trouble turning her head into a design that would, I guess, kind of fit into the Cuphead universe, because every design decision is pretty readable. It's pretty obvious what an item or a person is supposed to represent, especially those older cartoons. You have Cuphead, who just has a cup for a head, you have Muckman, who just has a mug for his head, and then a bunch of reanimated items and things in the world. But with Hornet's head, if she were to appear in Cuphead, you wouldn't really know why her head was shaped like that, and I couldn't really come up for any sort of alternative. I kind of thought about turning turning her head into a magnet, but I also thought that was going too far in another direction and that wouldn't explain why she was holding a needle. I was also contemplating whether or not to turn her head into like a thimble, but then again we would be going too far from the Hollow Knight aspect of things, so I decided to go a little bit more just good old 20s dress up and then just give her this kind of nice red headband with a red rose on it to make her look a little more classy and a little more fitting to the era. Next up we got our little boy, the Knight himself, a guy who I've stated multiple times doesn't have much personality to work with when it comes to character design, but you know what, he's a good boy nonetheless, and I actually had an easier time transforming him into a Cuphead character than I had with Hornet. And that might actually be exactly because he doesn't have extremely much personality to work with. His horns aren't really an essential part of his character design, it's more the whole shape of him and the more like squarish kind of round head he has, and the more cute and choppy and at the same time very short and stout design. So I decided to actually go very far in the change of the character direction, because I still found it readable and I could still see what the character was supposed to represent. But once again, I played a lot of Hollow Knight. I've played so much Hollow Knight, I can't even count the hours, so it might not be as or obvious to some other people than me. You guys are gonna have to call me out on that one later on. But I basically decided to turn Hollow Knight into a cup, you know, like Cuphead. And I decided to turn him into an actual kind of glass or mug that's slightly transparent so you can see the water that's flowing around inside him. And the reason that I picked water specifically and not the apparently weird milky substance that everybody else in Cuphead has is because I thought it would be kind of like a cool or funny little hint to his personality, because I always thought personally that that the Knight himself, I always thought he was as interesting as a glass of water. Personality wise, compared to everyone else, he's not the most interesting. I know that lore wise, if you dig into the lore and stuff, then there are a lot of like hints to what he feels or to what kind of like personal journey he goes through, but when it comes to direct storytelling, then there's very little to speak of. There's very little that you don't need to read behind the lines, or read between the lines it's called. So I ended up kind of having him being represented as a glass of water because that is the most hollow, bland character that, and by the way, I'm not calling the Knight's design bad. Actually, then it's pretty common and a pretty good game design idea to take a playable character and turn them into someone who's sort of bland, so it's easier for the player to put themselves in their shoes instead of the character becoming, or the playable character becoming like a character in and of itself. You're supposed to take the place of the character. And that's the same reason that characters like Frisk from Undertale is also kind of a bland design. So I'm not calling the Knight a bland, I'm saying it's intentionally supposed to be kind of like bland and neutral and not really have any emotion show through. So that's why I decided to symbolize him with a wonderful glass of water. Moving on to our last and final design, then we got Quirrell. And Quirrell I was a little bit on the fence about because I was a little afraid of going into it actually. I just decided that I wanted to sit down and draw, and after realizing in post, I haven't read the comics about Quirrell, so I actually felt a little bit under-equipped and I didn't want to go too far into anything character or lore-wise, because I know that I'll be at a disadvantage here in comparison to the whole community, which will undoubtedly correct me if I decide to go in a weird character direction. So I just decided to take what I could spy from the character's design itself and what I already knew from the game, and then try to somewhat put it in this 20s aesthetic. And here I took a lot of inspiration from King Dice, because he's the only character in that game that wears a suit. But suits were pretty common to wear back in the day, and especially back during the Depression times, there wasn't really much else for casual wear back then. So that's why I decided to give him this wonderful butterfly. Actually, the idea of the butterfly was was at first intended for Hornet, but I decided to switch that out for Rose so I could give Quirrell the big butterfly. And then I wanted to give him these two masks, which are kind of supposed to symbolize old theater masks. You've seen them on theater logos around, kind of like with the sad face and the happy face, and that represents the art of acting. And theater was one of the bigger ways to entertain yourself back then. Nobody could really afford movies, and movies weren't really in production, and especially animation was short at the time, so one of the main ways that you could kind of entertain yourself was through theater, a medium of entertainment which is freaking centuries old at this point. But yeah, that was pretty much the only idea that I could come up with for Quirrell, because it isn't exact. Masks weren't really a thing that you could cooperate or like combine or intertwine with the 20s in any sort of way except theater. So that's why I decided to kind of make him look like one of those, yes, say, kind of like, I don't know, hosts of a theater, I guess. And that's why his suit is also a little fancier than what you might find back then. But if there was anything that I would change to his design to make him look a little more Quirrell-like, except for just him holding the mask over his head, then I would have liked to have a little more bend in his back. Quirrell is really bent over a lot of the time, and his neck is actually attached to the front of his head, his head is attached to the front of his body. So I wanted a little bit more of that lean over, but that would kind of contradict the more showman kind of design that I went for here. So here he might look a little more like a stereotypical insect. He might be missing his trusty sword. So in that aspect, this might also be one of the designs where I went a little too far off the hook. But I think that's completely up to you guys' decision, whether or not, if you can still see what these characters are supposed to represent. Like, if I just gave you these characters without context, would you still be able to tell what they were gonna represent? That's up to you guys, and I want to hear you guys' opinions on it, because it's a really good practice to put them in different art styles like this, and to kind of try to translate one design to another time period and see how well you can make the very important aspects of that design shine through, even though you have to change a lot of stuff along the way. But anyways, that was pretty much all there was for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As I've already mentioned in previous videos, and because you can see I've already uploaded videos, I'm finally back from my little hiatus, and now I'm also back to the comments. I know that a bunch of you guys might have noticed that I don't reply in the comments, but that's because I've been away and I've kind of been trying to disconnect from social media. That's actually kind of a tip I got through, like, I don't know, mindfulness and a bunch of stuff. Turning off media can be good sometimes, but I'm back on media, and I'm so happy to see that so many of you guys replied on the day where I kind of explained my issues and the reason why I was going on hiatus. Or hiatus, it sounds so bad, like a little vacation. And you guys were so supportive, so thank you so much for showing all that support. So I don't have anything left to ask of you guys except leave your opinions on this drawing down in the comments, and I'm back, baby. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.